Well, good afternoon, team. It's Andrew here. We'll just give it a minute just in case other people are waiting to join or struggling to join. Yeah, still coming in. Hopefully you're all seeing the control panel and the chat boxes there. If you haven't got the control panel up, have a dig around so you find that, and we'll keep that running obviously throughout. So any questions or problems you've got, pop them up on there. But otherwise, I think we might as well get started. Thanks all very much for joining. I never start with an apology, so I'll apologise for the mess up on the timings this morning, and hope that didn't cause too much disruption. For those of you, if you do have to leap off at any point, this will be recorded, and I will circulate details of where we post that afterwards. I assume if the Claranet guys are happy, we'll put that up on our YouTube channel, but if not, I'll circulate the link separately. Couple of updates. I'm working on the assumption that Abate are not going to start face-to-face training before the autumn at the earliest. They are still looking at or going through a procurement for their virtual machines, but there are no dates attached to that yet. So I hope that we will be able to start before then on through virtual training. Otherwise, we'll continue with the program of webinars on a roughly weekly basis. And for those of you who've been kind enough to give me a feedback, please keep doing so, both in terms of the value of these employer-led sessions overall and any particular commentary you've got. The next one, 3rd of June, with Stace Lidgate from Cesium, very much a security consultancy focused discussion, and Adam Skinner from Lloyd's Banking Group is the following week, 10th of June. Not quite sure about the 17th, and then one on the 24th of June, which is Martin Smith, General Martin Smith, who set up Cyber Prism out of Aberdeen. So quite a nice program running there. The only other point is I hope that you're continuing to use the Skillsbuild platform. If you've got any issues or complaints, come to me on that, or if you're struggling to find the content that you want to use, let me know. Pretty much every day there is more content going up there, so keep your eyes peeled, and if you want to use this downtime to do more and more training, then that would be great. Let me know what you need to do. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the team from Claranet, or the pair from Claranet, Freya Wilson and Laura Reid. I'll leave them to introduce themselves. Rachel's also working the machinery in the background, and we'll all keep an eye on the chat for any comments you've got. But otherwise, Freya and Laura, over to you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew. Hopefully you can all hear me successfully. This is a little bit nerve-wracking that I have no way of telling whether or not you can hear me properly. So if you can't hear me very well, or you know, things aren't working out, please do say so in the chat. Okay, good afternoon. And the first challenge is that the slides aren't clicking. There we go, there they are. Okay, so the point of this webinar is for you guys to find out a little bit about who Claranet are, specifically Claranet Cybersecurity. So Claranet is a much wider conglomerate that does several things, one of the things of which is cybersecurity. Specifically, both Laura and I are from the penetration testing area, so we're going to talk specifically about that. And we're also going to talk about how your skills, specifically with the kind of backgrounds that you have, can be very valuable to us, and how to sell yourself in that way as well, and how that might lend itself to penetration testing. We've got some interactive parts, so I'm going to give you all a minute or so. If you want to either go to this URL or go to this QR code, it'll take you to that URL, and just get yourself set up with something called Participole. So it's basically a way of us being able to do things interactive, and you can vote. So we're going to be asking you some questions and getting you to vote on some things later on. The URL will come up later, but I give you just another couple of seconds to
Could someone could you pop it in the chat, Freya?
Oh yes,
you can't copy it off the screen.
Yeah, can do, but by doing so, I accidentally changed the slides. There we go.
I've got it. I'll put it in.
Yeah, thank you. It's not typing in the chat for some reason. Anyway, while Rachel does that, so I don't know what your views are on what hackers are. If you were to ask Google Images or stock photos, you would get something that looks like this. There is a lot of blue, a lot of black, a lot of hoodies, a lot of staring at binary. We very rarely stare at binary. Mostly men as well. That, it is a male-dominated industry at the minute, but there are women in the industry and non-males as well. So hello from me and Laura on that front. We do exist. Also, Claranet's branding is bright red and white, so we don't have any of this dark and dingy stuff. Our office is quite light and airy, and obviously we operate during normal working hours for the most part, so none of this kind of sitting in a dark room stuff. Following on from that, so this is what I look like. Obviously this is kind of weird because you can't actually see me, but there's a picture, so you kind of know what I look like. I actually didn't come into cybersecurity and penetration testing through what might be considered the normal route. So I didn't do a degree in computing and then, like, I don't know, a master's in information security or whatever, or a degree in cybersecurity from the outset. I was really interested in physics and did physics, and then after my PhD I wanted a little bit of a change. Also, work-life balance is definitely worth mentioning. Sometimes people will give the impression that a lot of testers spend all day testing at work and then they go home and they test all night as well because they just love it. And yes, I do find it very interesting, but I also do other things. I really like kayaking. I'm a kayaking instructor in my spare time and a massive outdoors enthusiast as well.
So hi everyone, I'm Laura. Thanks, Reid. Hi everyone, I'm Laura. I did come in a pretty standard way into this job, and I did a degree in Leeds on computer forensics and security, which was a bit of a mixture of infosec, a bit of hacking, bit of defensive security in terms of blue team and things, and also a bit of computer forensics, which was analysing computer hard drives and trying to find out, being taught how we find out dodgy information for people who work in the police and all of the interesting jobs like that. But it was cybersecurity that took my fancy and that I wanted to get into after I left my job. So after I left my degree, sorry. So when I left my degree, I came to work at SecOne, and I've been here for 4 years, working as a pen tester that entire time. Really love it, really interesting job. But it's definitely something that is a really challenging career in a really good way, and that you've got constant things to learn and you're constantly evolving and having to move with how fast technology goes.
So quickly now on to Claranet and who Claranet are. So this is Claranet's marketing department. This is their branding of Claranet cybersecurity. This is actually a slide that we've got in kind of our seminars that go out to potential clients, and it's got a card with a chip and pin on it. But actually, you know, this probably doesn't really reflect what our day job looks like. Claranet on the whole is made up of several different business units. They have business units that do things like hosting, cloud, networking, some other things that I can't remember off the top of my head, but then there's the cybersecurity part. And in the UK, they have cybersecurity units in other countries as well. But specifically in the UK, it's made up from 2 companies that they acquired. So Sec1, which is where I'm from, or me and Laura are from, and Not So Secure. Not So Secure does a lot of training. They both do specialist training for sort of expert hackers, and they also do training for people who are brand new to the industry as well. And that's on top of them being penetration testers. They also do a lot of research. Sec1, mostly focusing purely on penetration testing, also covers things like compliance and stuff as well, which we'll talk about later. Between the two parts, between Sec1 and Not So Secure, we have about 60 penetration testers. We have over 900 customers, so we've got quite a broad client base, ranging from some quite big names through to some very small companies as well. Not So Secure, that some of their training, you know, they'll give conferences at places like, or they'll give training at places like Black Hat, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a huge conference. It's based, they do ones all over the world in a different continent each year. We are affiliated with a few different organizations. So Crest, now also IASME, which is just recent. IASME have just taken over something called Cyber Essentials, which we'll mention later. And we do things like check testing as well. And PCI, so PCI is the payment card industry, and companies who manage payment card data have to have specific requirements for handling that data, because obviously it's very sensitive. And so we do compliance with that as well, and we'll make sure that they have all of the right network segregation in place and encryption storage for that data as well. So kind of in a little bit more detail of what we do here, we've kind of split it up into 4 broad categories. Starting off with security testing. So this is what me and Laura do. This is very much, you know, our realm. It's penetration testing. It's you know, social engineering testing. So penetration testing, well, I suppose social engineering testing is a kind of penetration testing, but penetration testing in the sense of websites, internal networks, mobile applications, external infrastructure, that kind of thing. And then social engineering testing, maybe things like phishing. We might do physical on-site assessments. So we'll show up and try and effectively break into a building. Continuous security testing is on there. So the best way to explain this is, if penetration testing is going to the dentist once a year, you have a deep cleaning of teeth, a good solid checkup, and we're making sure that, you know, you cover everything, but you don't do it very often. Continuous security testing is the equivalent of brushing your teeth every day. It's continuous scanning of clients' external footprint, making sure that any new vulnerabilities that come out, that we're testing for those, and also, as you know, any any changes are pushed out to that infrastructure, we can identify if any of those bring up any vulnerabilities. And so that's a combination of regular scanning, and maybe once a month they'll have some manual testing time dedicated to it. And then there's red teaming as well. Red teaming is kind of like, it's seen as perhaps like the gold standard for testers. In a red team, you're simulating an attack. So you'll go right the way through everything. You will go through the reconnaissance phase and finding out as much as you can about an organization. Then you'll be doing some social engineering. You'll run some phishing campaigns, keep them as subtle as possible. You might try some physical access as well. And then once you've got a foothold onto the network, you will start infiltrating the network, seeing what you can find, but generally keeping a very low profile. And the idea is that you don't get noticed. Quite often we'll have goals such as, can you send an email from the CEO's email account? And that would be the target. It takes quite a long time to work your skills up to that point, especially because evading detection is one of the biggest aspects of that. And a lot of our day-to-day testing, we don't really worry about evading detection. We are trying to get through as much as possible, identify as many vulnerabilities as possible, and we're not worrying about the organization knowing that about us. So protect and detect. This is things like our Security Operations Center, or Managed Detection and Response. What that means is we will be monitoring a client's network, and when something comes up that is a little bit suspicious, we will flag it up and we'll investigate it and identify if there is any, persistent or current threats. Does it look like there is an incident occurring? This comes from like the culture as well of assuming breach. So assuming at some point you are going to have a breach. The best thing you need to do is make sure you're ready for that. And it also includes things like firewalls. So we have a bit of a sideline in selling and managing and setting up firewalls as well. That's all handled by a separate part of Sec 1 that we don't really have very much to do with. But if it is something that you're interested in, feel free to get in touch, and we can, definitely get some more information over to you about that. So training, I mentioned a little bit about the things that Not So Secure provide. Also on top of that, Sec 1 does do some training. It's predominantly in two forms. It's employee awareness training, so teaching standard employees not to do things like click on phishing links and to pick up a USB pen that says photos on it and think, oh, I'll plug this straight into my laptop and see what happens. And things like teaching employees to challenge someone that they don't recognize, and just how to confidently and politely say, hi, I've just noticed you're here and you don't seem to have a badge and you're not accompanied by anyone. Is it all right if I just ask you to come with me for a second so that we can find you your designated point of contact? That kind of thing, just to make sure that employees are doing the best that they can to keep their organization secure. The other kind of training that Sec 1 specifically do is we do some seminars which are designed for current and potential clients. And in this, we'll go through some basics of penetration testing and hacking techniques, just so that they can have a feel for where their organizations might be failing the most, where they might want some testing. This kind of has a twofold benefit. One is that the client gets to have some training in something that they probably wouldn't, because the people coming along are generally devs or they're sysadmins and things like that, and penetration testing techniques isn't something that they're necessarily likely to know about. And the other benefit for us is that it tends to widen our client base a little bit. and demonstrate to people the value of testing. And finally, the last thing that we do is certification and audit. So these are things like making sure you align with the data security standard for PCI. We also do something called Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials is it's a fairly baseline level of compliance where you're making sure that you don't have things like default credentials. It's making sure that you don't have out-of-date software, you don't have a box running XP somewhere on your network, that kind of thing. And it's just a baseline level of assurance. It's basically the client will fill out a questionnaire and then we will ask for evidence to make sure that they don't have any of these things, and we'll perform some small tests as well to make sure that's the case. So we also do that. We also do some check testing as well, although that is predominantly for people with security clearance, probably relevant to yourselves, although it isn't something that I personally do, so I can't tell you too much about that. And if the slide is going to change, there we go. That's kind of a little bit about Claranet, and specifically about our little area of Claranet, and kind of the things that we do. So Laura's going to take over for a little bit and talk about how you guys might be best suited to our organisation.
So in terms of transition from the military into cybersecurity, we wanted to get a bit of an insight on how this might be helpful and how the skills that you have might transfer over to our industry. So just as a quick test question, if you could, on the poll, if you managed to sign up okay, if you could, based on that slide, answer where you think your technical skill level is at. And I'll just give that a few minutes just for you to answer.
So we've got about 11 people on the webinar, I think. So we'll just wait for a few more to respond. Have we got anyone else that's waiting to respond? If you're having any issues, if you just want to say it in the chat. I think if we potentially just go from there, it looks like we had more, but then the numbers went down for some reason.
I'll move it on from here, and then for the following few, because we'll have a few more questions, then if you could possibly try and use that link, but if not, if you're having any issues, don't worry.
Yeah, that's fair. Oh yeah, we've got a few more coming up now, 6.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
So I'll just move it on for now, and then we can get a bit of a general idea. Right, brilliant. So this is just to give us, as we move through this, just a bit of an idea of where all you guys are kind of sort of up to, just in terms of how much we go into detail with things and how technical we should be. So thanks for that. So in terms of transferable skills and, oh sorry, go for it.
I was just about to say, it's completely anonymous, by the way. You don't need to worry about it. You're not, you know, revealing anything to us. It's not a quiz that we'll be judging you by. It's completely anonymous. Just wanted to say that. Sorry.
So fine, don't worry. In terms of transferable skills, we actually have a few pen testers on our team who've come from military backgrounds, and me and Freya basically had a conversation with them because we wanted to get some insight into how they feel they've transitioned into this industry and what skills that they had from when they were in the military and how they think that's really helped them in this job. And these are just some of the few that they brought up. And I just thought I'd go through in terms of how these skills that you have within the military and how then they work in terms of a pen tester job and how key they are really in terms of completing the work that you need to do. Working under pressure, as pen testers, you're constantly going to be working to timescales. Pen testing is something that we sell as a number of days, and you'll get your scope and you've got to work through it and make sure that everything that you've been given is completed within a time frame. And sometimes you've got a lot to do and you've got to make sure that to the best that you can get everything done and work as efficiently as you can, because sometimes you get faced with a scope that's just so huge that you go, oh my God, I don't quite know what I'm doing and where to start, and you just have to keep you calm and keep going and just keep working. Flexibility is such a key one. In terms of pen testing alone, there are so many different areas that you might come across. You know, you might be testing a web application one day, and then the next day you're testing infrastructure, then you're doing a firewall review, or then you're back on doing something like mobile applications. You know, you've got to be flexible in terms of the technology that you are testing and the knowledge that you have to have. And then flexibility in terms of the wider cybersecurity industry. You know, there are so many different jobs that if you've got that flexibility to be willing to work in different areas, then you'll do really well in this industry, because there are so many different things you can pick. And if you start in pen testing and find it's not your thing, you know, there are so many different jobs that you could transition to where they all share a relative knowledge base. So what you learn in one job might be really useful in another. Teamwork, you know, there are a lot of pen tests that we do. We have to work with other members of the testing team, and you might have an absolutely massive scope and there are a fair few testers on it, and you've got to work together to get all of that tested, all of it reported on in a way that the client will be able to understand and be able to work and resolve their issues. Problem solving, definitely a big thing in pen testing. You know, we either have it where there's a lot of clients who maybe don't understand why they're being pen tested, and you've got issues when you start a test where you don't have the information that you need, or you don't have the right scope document that they've provided because they've not quite understood what they want doing, which is absolutely fine. And it's up to us as testers to solve these issues for them and work around it and help them understand what's going to be the most beneficial and help them improve their security posture. Technical skills obviously speaks for itself. Anything you learn technical wise will help you in this job. I think people get into this job thinking that they need to know everything about hacking, and that's not the case. You know, just being able to understand the underlying, say, network of something, or how a web application might work, or, you know, you might just know a few basic things, but when you come to start learning how to hack, all of them things can start helping you to understand how things are working in the background, which ultimately helps you with your job and helps you understand how to break things. Timekeeping, again, kind of ties into working under pressure. We do everything to a timeline, and we have days that we need to make sure everything's done, and while you juggle other things with work, and it's just a case of making sure that everything's done when it needs to be done. Personal pride, really key one. Most tests that we do, you do on your own, and it's a case of making sure that, you know, the report that you put out to showcase the work that you've done is the best that it can possibly be. And taking personal pride in this job is feeling like you've done a good job, feeling like you've found as many issues as you can, in terms of helping the customer and being able to present it all, which then leads on to presentation and report writing. We produce a report for every test that we do, and you've got to make sure that you understand how you can get across what you found in a technical manner and put it into something that makes sense and describes exactly what it is that you found, so that the clients can understand just how important a vulnerability might be in terms of the impact and risk on their company. If we can report it as nice as possible and as in detail as possible, then that allows other testers to be able to reproduce our work if they need to, and retesting can occur really easily, and clients can move forward in developing their security posture with our help. And finally, positions of responsibility. This job's full of different responsibilities that you get given, whether that's sensitive information from the clients, vulnerabilities that we find are sensitive information. It's a way into someone's business, and there are a lot of evil hackers out there who would love to get their hands on it. So we get put in a position of responsibility of helping people and keeping safe the information that we have. And in terms of responsibility, in terms of roles, in terms of a pen tester, you can move up to be a team leader, and you might get the responsibility of managing your own team of testers, and just the responsibility of managing your own diary and managing your own jobs. So in terms of, I've got a few quotes now from some of the testers that we have on our team who've come from a military background. I just kind of wanted to get from them a bit of an understanding of how they think their transition's gone. One of the things that got mentioned was how the military environment might develop someone's personality in ways that the civilian employment might not do. And one thing that one of our testers mentioned is that it really helps to develop conflict resolution, teamwork, dependability. And they are such key skills when it comes to pen testing, because we are a big pen testing team, and we are a team of people who really want to help each other and share information, work together to get jobs done. Teamwork is really a crucial thing in it. Unlike a lot of maybe other teams that work a lot smaller, and we do individual testing, we are still a big wider team who are always willing to help each other. So that's a really key one. And dependability, clients are dependent on us to deliver the work for them, and sales, the account managers are dependent on us to get the job done, and just being available and willing to help when there's an issue and being flexible with how you work is such a key thing. Another one of our testers mentioned was that since in the forces, you have bespoke trays that maybe managers will move you around into a mix of different jobs, which maybe in the civilian world, maybe we specialise a lot more. And that they mentioned that the adaptability that you develop and the willingness and experience of trying a bit of everything and being willing to do that is definitely something that they think is underestimated, because it's so key in this job. We have so many different areas, and whether that's in pen testing or the wider cybersecurity, like I mentioned, there are so many different things that you could try, and there's going to be, this job is so broad, it's hard to be an expert in everything, and to be willing to have a go at different things, whether that be social engineering, or you want to have a go at a web application pen test, or you want to have a go at firewall review, or then you want to move out of pen testing and try your hand at defensive security in terms of blue teaming and security operations analysts and things like that. It's something that will definitely benefit you in terms of adapting to an industry that is forever changing and rapidly changing. So I also asked some of the testers what useful things they wish they'd knew, or that they did know before they came into pen testing, that benefited how they are. One of the lads mentioned that they now have a really good work-life balance in this job, which is something that's always really good to hear. And he was saying he thinks that's why so many people get into it, and it is a really good environment just to not become stagnant with your skills, because the industry is just constantly evolving. There's constantly something that you can improve your skills in. Like I mentioned, it's hard to be a master of everything in this industry, whether that's in pen testing or just the wider cybersecurity. And once you feel like you've conquered one, there are so many different topics that you could move on to, or so many different roles that you could move into to keep skills going. And I think that's a really good benefit of this industry. And one of the things that got mentioned was that by one of our testers from his background in the military, was that he feels him and a lot of his friends came out as very compliant and conditioned people to say yes to a lot of things. And I think it's important to remember that it's okay to say no at some stages, because this job is full on. There are a lot of things that you've got to learn, and you will have a lot of testing if you go into pen testing. You'll have back-to-back tests, you'll have a lot that you feel is on your plate. You'll go on client site and do tests, and you'll be up and down the country, and it's okay to remember that, you know, we can't know everything at once. And if there's something that you feel not comfortable with or you don't know, it's okay to say no. And, you know, we all get probably a slight bit of imposter syndrome, because there are so many knowledgeable people in this industry, and you feel like half the time you don't know what you need to know. So it's always good to be like, you know what, sometimes no, I can't do that because I don't quite know, but you are willing to learn and you are willing to teach, and there will be always someone who's willing to help out. So a few tips and resources from some of our pen testers. Apologies if you know any of these things already. I just thought I'd mention them just in case I didn't. One of the resources that one of our pen testers found really useful when he was getting into this industry was a community called Tech Vets on LinkedIn, which he said was over 700 IT professionals who are helping people get into this industry, get into IT, get into technology. But they do a lot of focus on penetration testers. And they offer things like free courses and VMs that you can practice on, or like leads for jobs, and just contacts, and building up a bit of help, bit of support, and a bit of a community, which is always really helpful. A couple other tips and resources: conferences. If you're wanting to get into pen testing, there are some amazing hacker conferences to go to, some that are free, some that are very cheap, and some that are a little bit more expensive. You know, in the UK alone, there's a fair few. There's a B-sides, I think, in most cities now, and it's just such a great place for meeting people, and it's a really good space for learning techniques and skills that you wouldn't have sometimes even thought to learn because you didn't know they existed. And it's full of some absolutely talented people that are just brilliant, and it's a dead good atmosphere. And whether, you know, you drink or not, like, there's always people sat having a drink afterwards who want to sit and have a chat and want to just teach you things, and it's just a really nice environment. Twitter and LinkedIn, which kind of ties into the slide before, there are so many ethical hackers and pen testers on Twitter and on LinkedIn, which are forever putting out useful tips, bits of knowledge, bits of resources that you might not otherwise come across. And that is one thing I found really useful over the years about picking up information. And local ethical hacking communities, if you're getting into pen testing, this is something that is really good to have. And granted, it might not be possible all over the country. Leeds, where Sec1 is based, has a really good local ethical hacking community, and we have a meetup every month called DC151. And again, it's just meeting like-minded people. It's meeting people in this industry who know how you feel when the job gets a bit much, and have knowledge that you might not have, and you might have knowledge that they don't have. And, you know, one of the lads mentioned that they thought when they got into pen testing that there'd be a lot of knowledge hoarding and that people wouldn't want to share what they knew. And my experience of the industry is that it's completely the opposite, and that people are very, very willing to help anyone out if they don't know something or want to learn more. So I'll hand back over to Freya now to go through penetration testing with you.
All right, thanks, Laura. So I'm just going to talk about penetration testing more specifically in a bit more detail. Penetration testing is essentially trying to break into stuff. It's trying to find the squishy bits of the organization, and, you know, those squishy bits, we call that the attack surface. So the attack surface of an organization might include all their external infrastructure, so their websites, any IP addresses that they've got, their mail servers, VPN, that kind of thing. It's not just that, it's also things like their physical premises. So being able to access the buildings, and their employees. Their employees are a huge, they're probably the squishiest bit of the organisation, and that is because they're very vulnerable to manipulation and social engineering and that kind of thing. Penetration testing covers all of these areas, and not just that, but once you've got a foothold on the organisation and you've perhaps managed to access the internal network, what can you do on that internal network? So I don't know, from the perspective of someone that's just plugged their computer in a random room, can you pivot around the network to be able to access sensitive information, sensitive databases, that kind of thing? It's worth bearing in mind as well. So there's a difference here between the perspective of an attacker and the perspective of a penetration tester. So an actual malicious attacker is probably going to want to keep a low profile, whereas a penetration tester, you know, one of the first things we aim to do is to get to domain admin, mostly because that's a really good way of demonstrating to the client, like, hey, we've managed to find something that's got a really big impact here. That's something that we're really trying to do throughout this, is find the vulnerabilities, find as many vulnerabilities as possible, and also demonstrate to the client why it's important that they need to remediate those, you know, demonstrating the impact of these things. When we do it though, we'll probably be quite noisy, and especially because we have time-boxed assessments. In reality, a hacker doesn't have 4+1, so four days to do the attack and a day to write it up. Like, that's not how an attacker works. They'll be very quiet and make very slow steps across the network as they pivot through it. And that is one of the key differences between the two. And you know, what I've said there, what we're aiming to do is identify as many flaws and vulnerabilities and misconfigurations as possible, so that they can be remediated. And then the idea is that that will give the organization some kind of assurance that they have a degree of protection, or that perhaps only more sophisticated attackers would be able to get through, or they are conscious of where their most vulnerable parts are, and steps that they might need to take to reduce how vulnerable they are. When we do a penetration test, we go through a series of steps. So you have the scoping process that happens at the beginning, and this generally happens before the tester actually starts testing, and it's probably, I don't know, anything from 6 weeks to a week in advance. And one of our testers will be designated to go through all of the scopes, and an account manager will come to us and say, this client is interested in having these things tested. We will have a look at those things. If they're websites, we'll have a little click around and we'll see how long we think that's going to take you to test. And we'll ideally iron out at that point any kind of niggling things. So, have you realized that you've also got this this other application here? Do you want that testing as well, or are you just looking at the specific part? We might discuss recommendations in terms of if they've got a massive network, which things they might want to focus on in terms of testing and that kind of stuff. And that all happens beforehand, and that is the legal bit. So that will then ultimately result in a statement of work, or a scope document as we call it. And that statement of work will have defined scope of which things we're allowed to touch and which things we aren't. And that is one of the key things that makes us above the law. So the Computer Misuse Act basically forbids us from being able to touch or test anything that we don't have explicit permission for. And so that is a really, really important step in this engagement. We can't just go willy-nilly and test whatever we want. Sometimes you can have things that are quite broad scope. For example, a red team assessment, that's likely to be very broad, and they're likely to say, yeah, just treat us as though, we can do anything we want, but obviously the only things we don't want happening are anything that might disrupt our PR, for example. So if we were to DOS the customer, then they would probably be pretty upset because it's disrupting their work. So after scoping, there's then the reconnaissance. That's more relevant for social engineering, you know, open source intelligence, kind of finding out as much as you can about the organization themselves. But it's also a little bit relevant to other kinds of pen tests as well. And then you've got the discovery and scanning phase. So this is, I don't know, if you've got a website, what that would mean is clicking on all of the bits of the website, looking for any bits that are exposed, but perhaps you can't access by clicking. So that's called directory busting. And scanning as well. So scanning is it's automated and it's a way to assist manual testing. So there are pros and cons to manual testing and automated testing. Humans can identify things and apply context in a way that an automated scanner just can't. However, an automated scanner is very good at picking up things, especially if they're repetitive, that a human might not spot. So maybe things that are a bit subtle or slightly weird behaviors or patterns that are happening that might be tricky for a human to interpret. So we use automated scanning to assist our manual testing, and that also ensures like a much broader coverage. So we're testing every single request, and then the automated scanner might come up and tell us like, oh, these requests have some weird looking behavior, or they have some kind of interesting behavior that might indicate there's something going on there, and you can use that to inform where you're going to spend your time most effectively. After you've done that kind of stage, sort of finding the vulnerabilities, this is the bit that's, you know, kind of the fun bit, the hacking bit. Where do the vulnerabilities live? Again, we're looking for breadth rather than as a malicious hacker might do, or as a hacker who, you know, if you're sat at home doing something like hack the box, if you're hacking something like that, there's generally like one route into it and you're looking for a flag at the end of things. This isn't necessarily what that's about. It's also flagging up things that might compound together with other vulnerabilities. So I don't know if there could be some misconfigurations, like some flags missing from cookies when cookies are set, which could, combined with other vulnerabilities, result in in actual exploitation. Exploitation is the really fun bit. You won't always get something that's exploitable on a test. You are more likely to find exploitable things on an internal test than an external test. External tests tend to be fairly robust these days. It's not quite like your experience of all of the training materials that you have, where obviously everything is vulnerable. And that can sometimes affect people's confidence quite a bit when they first start, because they're sat there going, I can't find anything. I can only find these couple of little things. Does that mean I'm a bad tester? Or does that mean that I've got bad technical skills? It doesn't at all. It's just that the number of exploitable vulnerabilities is likely to be much less on an external test. And generally we start testers off as well with external testing, and then they will move on to internal testing where there's generally a lot more exploitable stuff. And once you've done any exploitation, you've got your cleanup from that. So this is making sure that I don't know if you've shelled a website or if you've created a domain admin account on an internal test, that you've made the client aware of what you've done so that they know to clear it up afterwards, and you're not creating further vulnerabilities in your wake by leaving an additional account there that shouldn't be there, or a shell up on a website, and that kind of thing. And then finally, and this is the bit that probably sets us apart from malicious attackers, we have to write a report about it. It's probably the thing that people aren't quite prepared for the most when it comes to penetration testing, because everyone loves the technical side of things. They love the technical skills and the hacking, and it's great, and they're like, we can do all of these things, it's amazing, and then they realize I have to write it up. It depends what your communication skills are like. You probably have massive benefit from the sorts of backgrounds you're coming from in this sense, and your communication skills, but it's very important that the client is able to reconstruct exactly what you've done to find the vulnerability and then exploit it, so that they are able to reproduce it and then remediate it and fix it. Alongside this is the remediations and recommendations as well. We kind of tend to make that a little bit easier for ourselves. So we have a database of kind of stock text for recommendations and remediations. So the way to remediate a specific vulnerability is going to be the same for, you know, most versions of that. And then you can just put small tweaks. So it doesn't take quite as long to remediate things as, to write the report as it might otherwise do when you're faced with it. And it's something that gets a lot quicker with practice. So my first report took me absolutely ages. And now I've done enough reports that I have several things I can copy and paste from, and it doesn't take anywhere near as long. On that front as well, it's worth mentioning that, you know, anything 4 days and under, we generally have one reporting day at the end. If you have any more than 4 days, then you might get 2 reporting days, or 3 for a really long test, but that's quite unusual. However, it's probably best to report as you go along. So as you're finding vulnerabilities, make sure you're taking screenshots. So you need evidence of everything you've done. Screenshots are your friend. And, you know, kind of writing things up and making sure that you're kind of keeping track of the things that you've found, and how serious they are as well. If you've got something that's very serious, you may want to alert the client a bit earlier depending on the circumstances, especially if the client has some tight turnarounds as well. So they might want a draft report early, like at the end of the reporting day, whereas normally we would write a draft report that would go through some kind of quality assurance process where you'd get a colleague to peer review it, point out all the places you put silly spelling mistakes, or maybe other mistakes. They might say, you know, we would recommend that you change these vulnerabilities, that sort of thing. And then the final report will go out probably a week to 10 days after you've finished the test. So I've talked a little bit about this already, so just maybe go into this a little bit more detail. Types of penetration testing. We mentioned about compliance, so that's the payment card industry stuff. It's cyber essentials, it's check testing and that kind of thing. And then the internal and external testing, we might, so an infrastructure internal test, we might show up, normally we would show up at a client's site, plug into their network and see what we can find. These days we're currently trying to perform these, although that is not necessarily straightforward, but basically we're putting a VM in the client network and accessing that remotely, SSHing into that and performing the test from the VM. We do web applications and external infrastructure testing, and we'll do testing in and of the cloud. So if something is hosted in the cloud, then we'll check for any specific vulnerabilities related to that. I know Amazon S3 buckets is, you know, a common one, exposed S3 buckets. And if people host their infrastructure in the cloud as well, then we can put a VM into that network and test that network from there. Firewall reviews is something that we do. So just taking a firewall configuration and double checking it for anything that's really stupid, you know, like an any rule that allows ingress and egress for any IP address, that sort of thing. And mobile applications. So we probably get most of our testing is web applications, followed by internal testing. But we do get some mobile apps that come through. As a general rule, it's our more experienced testers that are qualified to do the mobile app testing, just because it takes a little bit more experience. But it's, you know, they're definitely quite fun to do as well. And then we've also got the social engineering stuff. So this is phishing. We'll run phishing campaigns, gather some statistics on how many people click on the link, so that clients can decide where best to put their, you know, employee awareness training, who really is a bit of a liability to the organization and really needs to learn how to spot scams from a distance, that kind of thing. And we'll do smishing. If anyone doesn't know what smishing is, it's phishing via SMS. So those are the text messages that you get that say, hey, you know, you won a prize draw, follow this link. And they're more and more common now we all have smartphones. And we'll do phishing as well, which is voice phishing, and that's where you would call up the help desk, for example, and say, hi, I'm Fiona Jones, and I'm just about to get into a meeting, but I can't find my password anywhere. Please, can you reset it for me? And try and convince the person on the help desk that they need to reset your password, tell you the password so you can get in. And physical access as well. So this is kind of showing up to a client site and trying to blag our way past the receptionist or the security guards, and you know, trying to convince someone that you've got a meeting, or trying to sneak past when the reception desk is unattended. We'll do things like try and clone people's badges, both their access badges, so you can get RFID cloners, or we might put on a fake ID badge, wear a fluorescent jacket and take a clipboard, and you know, pretend we're there with BT to check the phone lines. Or we might try and, you know, we might stand in the smoking area and wait for someone to go back in, follow them, and just get them to hold the door open for us as we go in, walk in through the back door, that kind of thing. And that's our physical access testing. In terms of testing certifications, I know this is something that a lot of you are probably going to be interested in. The ones we see most commonly are the CREST certifications and something called OSCP. So a little bit about the CREST ones. They have 3 levels. So they've got CPSA. That is a multiple choice exam, and it's predominantly about sort of learning things by rote. It's quite an annoying exam, but it doesn't really test much in the way of practical skills, and that's kind of your first level. Following on from that, once you've done CPSA, you can do a practical element, and the practical element, you will go down to a test center, have access to their network, and they will ask you a series of questions like, what vulnerability is at 192.168.3.50 or whatever, and it will be a practical test. However, the vulnerabilities are generally quite old. They're known for being from the kind of early to late noughties kind of time, and they're not necessarily reflective of things you would see in the current day. But someone who has CRT would be considered a reasonable intermediate tester. Following on from that, you've got your certified tester, or CCT. This comes in 2 flavors. You've got your web flavor and your infrastructure flavor, and they are probably, they're the kinds of things that our team leaders have. So if you have your CCT, then you're probably a much more advanced level, and they are well known for being quite difficult to get, especially because at that point you're specializing in one or the other. Sometimes you get people that do both, but that's very rare. There's So we see that the most, and that is the process that we will put any of our testers through. So if you were to join us, we would probably get you to do CPSA first. And then after you've been here for maybe a couple of years, we would look at doing CRT. And then if you wanted to, after that, CCT. The other one that we see quite a lot of is OSCP. You'll hear a lot of people raving about OSCP, Offensive Security Certified Professional. And it's predominantly infrastructure, so it doesn't have much in terms of web. And there's a course that goes with it, and the course is well known for being very thorough. And people come out of it with very strong technical skills and technical hacking skills. So this is well known for being sort of fairly well respected. However, it does take a lot of time. Like if we have testers that are doing this, either they're spending, every waking moment that they're not at work doing OSCP, or we've had some testers that have actually taken time off to do OSCP specifically because it takes a lot to do it. And that technically is listed as equivalent to CRT, but there are huge differences, and I don't think the two are necessarily comparable. It's also worth saying as well that people come to us with OSCP and they have very strong technical skills, but their wider testing skills perhaps aren't quite as strong. And that is something that's worth bearing in mind as well. Those wider skills are really valuable. So people who come in with OSCP might be very they might be very keen to get a shell on every website that they see, and then they're suddenly quite shocked and surprised when they discover that they cannot, in fact, get a shell on like 95% of websites that they test. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well. You do see other certifications. Some of them are briefly listed here. IASME have recently taken over the Cyber Essentials certification from Crest. I'm not 100% sure what exam scheme they have because they've literally just taken it over. GIAC have a series of exams that are fairly well respected, but they're quite expensive. The course is quite good. I did one of them at a previous workplace. But then the exam itself was an open book multiple choice test. So it was quite I felt personally that it was mostly a test of how quickly can I look things up in a book. And to be fair, you don't necessarily need to know things by memory to test. Like a lot of testing is Googling things and saying, I've not come across this before, how does this work? It's worth bearing that in mind. And eLearn security is something that I've seen cropping up more frequently. They seem to have a very good reputation for very good training and certifications as well. If you don't need a certification to join us, most of our testers come in at a junior level without any of these certifications. But if you did have any, then that would almost certainly be a benefit. And in particular, if you did have something that isn't listed on there, doesn't matter. We would look into it and have a look, because there is an awful lot of certifications out there. But again, don't worry necessarily about doing them. We do have plenty of testers that join us that don't have any of these certifications. Okay, so that link that we had at the beginning with the Participal, so this is your cybersecurity-seminar.participal.com, and the link is in the chat. Okay, if you want to get that up, make sure you've got it up, because we are going to walk you through conducting a penetration test, but it's going to be a little bit interactive, so we're going to want your help with this. So we're going to start, we have the pre-engagement interaction, and this is the scoping document that you've been given. So I'll give you a few seconds to have a look at that. You've got 4 URLs that this client wants testing. Some of them are in production, some of them are in pre-production, so they've not gone live and public yet. A couple of them are unauthenticated, and a couple of them they've given you some credentials for. Those credentials appear to be at different levels as well. So you've got a basic user for one of them, and you've got an administrative user for one of them as well. You fire up your browser, you connect a proxy, so this might be Burp if you're familiar with Burp, and your website that you click on, webappabc.com, redirects to a different domain for several of the pages. What does this mean for your test? What are you going to do about it? Do you just carry on testing? It's part of the application. It was written in the scope, so go for it. Do you only test the pages that are webappabc.com and just leave out the webapp123 ones? Do you not test any of it at all because the whole scope is now invalidated? Or are these pages technically out of scope, but it's not clear what you're going to do should you contact the customer to find out more? So I'll give you a little while to vote and put in your answers there. Just while we're waiting, I've noticed there's a few questions that have come up. We will look at questions at the end, especially some of the more specific ones. And if anyone isn't able to get the poll working, although hopefully it's all right, the URL is at the bottom there if you need it as well. But if you aren't able to get it working, don't worry about it too much. You can always put it in the chat if you wanted to. Okay, so we've got about 8 responses. I'm gonna take that as most of you based on the number of attendees we've got. So let's see, what are we gonna do? And hopefully I clicked and that should tell us the answer. Is it gonna give us the answers? Try again. There we go. Okay, so majority of you gonna contact the customer. Okay, that's pretty good. That's what we'd have expected. B is also actually a valid answer in that technically those are not part of the scope. We don't know if we've got permission to test that at all, and you would be able to test the rest, but in this case it probably indicates that something has maybe gone a little bit wrong during the scoping stage. And you would get in touch with the customer and just say, you know, what were you expecting here? You know, what were you intending? Were you intending for this web application? You would hope that the person that scoped it would have picked up on this. However, sometimes websites aren't live when they get scoped. Sometimes they're not accessible for whatever reason, and sometimes they may have changed. The configuration of them might have changed in the meantime. So worth bearing that in mind.
So then your next stage of your pen test, thank you, you're looking at reconnaissance, discovery and scanning. So you're looking to move on to finding out more information and discovering different parts of the app or the infrastructure that you've been given and kicking off your vulnerability scans to see what they can pick up and what we can identify. So again, like Freya mentioned, there's our scope. We've got 4 URLs. We've got 2 that require creds, one of which is admin. So in terms of your vulnerability scanner, if we're about to kick it off, what are we going to be putting into our scanner? Is it going to be all of the URLs and give them the scanner credentials? There's a lot of vulnerability scanners that you can give credentials to, and it will scan what is behind authentication to give a more thorough scan of everything that's going on. So would you put everything within your scope doc, so URLs and credentials? Would you put nothing into your scanner? Would you put some in but exclude the payment portal and the customer portal, would you scan everything apart from the VPN? Or would you give all the URLs but leave out the admin credentials? Or do you think you need more information on what the sites are like and what functionality they have before you scan them? So I'll give you a little bit of time to answer that one. Got 8 answers so far. Any others? So we'll have a look at it and see what you guys think. So in terms of E and F, that you could approach it in 2 ways. We'd mostly look at it and go, yeah, you could scan them all, but you wouldn't give it admin credentials because you typically have an admin site that has some dangerous functionality when it comes to a scanner. A scanner can't look at something and go, oh, better not touch that because we're probably going to delete everything from a database. Whereas a scanner will just hit it anyway. And giving it admin credentials can just cause a world of pain for you and for your client because of whatever havoc it might cause. So definitely E in terms of we could scan everything, but let's not give it admin creds. But you could also take the approach of F if you really wanted to, and you could ask the client and be like, yeah, it's an admin account, but does it have what functionality might it have, and does it do anything, you know, necessarily that might cause a load of issues. In terms of not scanning any of them, you know, we would always put the URLs into a scanner, and you can set your scanners to be maybe running on lower threads if it's a production site and you're worried about it being live with real customers and real users and you don't want to knock things over. You can, you know, amend your scanner to how you want it to be, so it's more careful.
So moving on from, just moved it back. Okay, so moving on from the sort of discovery and scanning part of things, looking at vulnerability identification. I'm aware that not all of you will be familiar necessarily with all of these terms, but I'll do my best to kind of explain them as they're going along. So one of the things about penetration testing is that as much as it is a science, it is also an art form. So what we're trying to get down to here is like that kind of sense of following your nose. Where are the bad smells? What looks like it could be vulnerable? So in particular, this is kind of dynamic content and stuff like that. What types of things does it look like it might be interacting with? So you log on to one of these websites and you've clicked around and you've noticed that one of the requests looks like this. So it's a GET request, and you've got a couple of parameters there. So you've got the FN equals session and the user ID equals 32344 parameters there. So if you are testing, this is probably going to set off some alarm bells of there are specific things I'd be looking for here. So stored cross-site scripting, this would be something that would exist in a request where you are sending data to the server is storing it somewhere, and it doesn't it doesn't process the stuff that you send it, so that you can insert JavaScript into the site. Unrestricted file upload means that you could upload any files that you wanted to. Username enumeration is a way of seeing which usernames are valid. Perhaps you send a couple of usernames and one of them is valid and one of them is invalid, and you get different responses for both of them. You could then use that to do password brute forcing. Something here called insecure direct object reference. It's a bit of a mouthful, but basically what that means is you have an object or a parameter in the request, and the reference to that request, the server doesn't check whether or not you have authority to actually see that information. So you might be able to see information from a different user, for example. SQL injection, you've probably all heard of it at some point. It's probably one of the most famous vulnerabilities. It's where you can inject things into the backend database. And then we've got another option here, which is both D and E. So insecure direct object reference, by the way, you might have heard it as being called IDOR, just the initials of that, just in case any of you have heard of it from something else. Don't worry, by the way, there is no pressure to be getting this right or anything like that. We're just kind of going through some pen testing skills that you might not get from other things. So it's being able to identify what kinds of vulnerabilities might come up in different places. I'll also reinforce here that we can't see who has voted for what at all, so you don't need to worry about that. You can get it completely wrong and it's okay. You'll be the only person that ever knows. Just a few more seconds. Any more for any more? Oh, yeah, we're up to 9, 10. Cool. 11. Okay. I think that's all of our attendees, so we'll leave it at that. Our survey says, okay. So most people have gone for F here. So that's both IDOR and SQL injection. A few people have gone for username enumeration. Okay. It isn't username enumeration, but I can see why you might think that because you've got the user ID. Is actually, come to think of it, possible if you want to try a series of different user IDs and see if you get any different responses, but it wouldn't necessarily be username. You might be able to get some usernames as a consequence of this. The one that we're mostly looking for here is that insecure direct object reference. So this parameter, the user ID equals, and then it's got a number. Whenever you see a parameter that looks like that, that should be an instant flag to say, "Ooh, I wonder what happens if I change that parameter and try it with a series of different numbers." You might get our user ID equals 1, and that will respond with a valid profile for a completely different user from yourself. And the server has not checked whether or not you have authorization to see that information. This is also likely to be interacting with a backend database, which could very well be SQL. So I would also be concerned about SQL injection here as well. So I'd say the most correct answer is probably F for this, although D and E are both valid responses, and C might actually be as well. You might be able to enumerate usernames through this somehow, but it's not the thing that would spring to mind immediately. So well done to everyone that got that right.
So looking at the next vulnerability, you've got a request and a response, and through a post request you've submitted a piece of information. So in this case, testing 1, 2, 3. And when you're looking at your response in a proxy, you've noticed that what you've put in has been reflected in the application's response. So in terms of while we're pen testing, there would be a couple of things that jump out there about what we would instantly probably look at, which might be store cross-site scripting, which is something that you've inputted through user input. Has that been stored by the application? And can you execute JavaScript to steal cookies, deface the site, things like that? Unrestricted file upload, which might be uploading shells and malicious files to the application. Username enumeration, which, as I've mentioned, is obviously enumerating valid users for the application. Insecure direct object reference, as Freya mentioned. Is it A and F, or is it reflected cross-site scripting, which again is inputting data and seeing if it comes back in the response and whether you can mess with it, do anything with it, and get some JavaScript to execute. So again, if you could pick which one that you think would be our first protocol to have a look at from judging by them, that response, that request and that response. Oh, sorry, I don't know why that clicked on. So I'm sorry if it's stopped anyone before the answers. So mostly answers at F, which, you know, perfectly, we would definitely check for reflected cross-site scripting because it is coming back in your response. And as you can see, it's completely mirrored what you've entered as user input. E, definitely as well, because, you know, if it's reflecting it in one place, there's a chance somewhere that it might be storing it as well. So you definitely look at cross-site scripting as a whole and be like, can I get it to reflect yes or no? And then is it possible that I can get the application to store my payload, which is obviously then going to higher the impact and make more of an issue for the client. Insecure direct object reference, probably when looking at the response, the request, sorry, with it being a title, you could definitely look to see if maybe there was other titles that you could have a look at, but in terms of what the response is indicating, the first protocol would be, can I get a payload to execute on the page client side, and can I get it to do something weird? Moving on to the next vulnerability.
Okay, so you have found a login box and you've been messing about with the login box, and when you type in user01@blah.com, you get the response invalid username, please try again, and you try a different email address, and for this one you get invalid password, please try again. So what vulnerability have you guys managed to find here? So is it default credentials? So this is where, you know, your credentials are probably something really simple like I don't know, password 1 or the default for that particular architecture. Is it a SQL injection? Can you enumerate usernames? Is it broken authentication? Privilege escalation? So broken authentication is kind of a bit like IDOR. IDOR is a specific type of broken authentication. It's not checking whether or not you have authorization to see something. Privilege escalation, so you can pivot from one user to the other. Or cross-site request forgery. For anyone that doesn't know, cross-site request forgery, you can forge a request, hide it in a website with like a clicky button of some sort, and convince a user to click on that, and that would perform an action on the website, especially if they're logged into it. So it will send the request from the attacker's website that the attacker has hosted to the valid website. So you might be able to do things like, I don't know, convince someone to accidentally click on something which transfers £1,000 into your bank account, say. I'll just wait for a few more responses here. Okay, we've got 10, so I'm calling it at 10 responses. And so it says C, username enumeration. Yeah, absolutely. So what's happening here is you are getting a different response for a correct username to a wrong username. So that first one is a completely made up username and it tells you that the username is wrong. When you type in the correct username but the wrong password, it tells you that you can infer that the username is correct because it only tells you that the password is wrong. So what you could do from that is you could get a whole list of usernames. You could just, I don't know, take a whole list of first names and last names and put at gmail.com, at I don't know, sec-1.com, depending on the name of the organization, perhaps, and just try a whole load of them, find out which ones are valid. That then will give you a nice list of usernames to try some default passwords with, or to try some simple passwords. So the most common passwords are going to be something like password 1, let me in, things like that. So if you maybe you could get like 1,000 or more valid usernames, there is a reasonable chance that when you've got that many valid usernames, that you can actually find someone that has weak credentials without even having to lock anybody out, because you only try a couple of passwords. So that is actually something that seems quite small and quite subtle, but could lead to a significant breach by doing that, especially if there are a lot of users. It's not clicked. Why is it clicked? There we go.
Okay, so looking at another vulnerability another request that we've found, which again, like Freya's mentioned, do you look at it and do you see anything that could already flags up in your brain is going, oh, that smells a bit bad, or that might look like I could mess with it and maybe get somewhere. So in this case, we've got a GET request, no parameters, but we have 2 cookies. We've got a session cookie and we've got a cookie called type, which equals the value user. So if we think about what we could possibly do with that, what vulnerability might you be looking for? Might it be a privilege escalation vulnerability where you can change your role from something basic to something higher? Is it username enumeration again to obviously find different valid user accounts for that application? Is it header injection? Is it reflected cross-site scripting, arbitrary file upload, or server-side request forgery, which is similar to how Freya mentioned before, but this is server-side to do things a little bit more with the back end and pull files out and read files that you're not supposed to. So I'll give you a bit of time to answer that one. Up to 7, just a little bit longer, and I'll see what you've got to say. 8, 9. Any more? Give a couple more seconds. I will have a look then. So a bit of a mix. In terms of what I look for, we'd look for privilege escalation. So A, like Freya said, that's that cookie type user. It's very possible that you could change that to say type admin or something else that allows you to change your user role to be completely different and allow you to access resources that you shouldn't have access to. And it might be that if you then go to /admin, the only check that that application then does is, oh, what does the cookie say that this user is? You know, you could be somewhere along the lines just changing something and the app just accepts it without actually verifying it. Username enumeration, fully understand the thought process behind it in terms of the cookie disclosing what type of user it is, but whether it actually would disclose usernames is maybe a bit unlikely within it. Well, you'd hope within a cookie that it's not just passing usernames about. Header injection, you could definitely test for header injection, since that, you know, you could change the host header, see if it allows you to change something else. So definitely, and then server-side request forgery, you could definitely have a look, but with no, you know, it's unlikely that maybe from that, that's what our first protocol would be. We'd be looking to see if we could escalate privileges.
Cool. Okay. So we've got another one here. You've got a request where you're downloading some kind of PDF, brochure.pdf. So again, you know, what sorts of things do you think this is likely to flag up? So URL redirect, that's where you can overwrite a URL in a response to have someone accidentally click to a URL that you control. Stored cross-site scripting, which we mentioned earlier. File path traversal, so it's when you're accessing a file and you might be able to access other files that aren't intended. SQL injection, as we've said before, about when you're interacting with the database. Broken authentication, you know, is it verifying whether or not you are allowed to access that specific resource? Or cross-site request forgery. So this is what we said before about inducing a user to click on something and perform an action without realizing that they're actually doing it. So all of these things, by the way, what they're doing is kind of giving you a feel for, as testers, we need to prioritize our time. And we also need to be familiar with a wide range of things. So being able to spot what sort of things we think might be coming up is a really, really valuable skill. And, you know, malicious attackers, you might have someone who just specializes in one kind of thing and they don't really necessarily know how to exploit anything much wider than this. So they might specialize in SQL injection, say, and if you don't have any SQL injections on your website, then you might be lucky that day. But if you do happen to have a SQL backend database, then an attacker might specifically be targeting that. An attacker isn't going to be coming along and saying, oh yeah, you've got all these different things here, that bit looks a little bit bad over there. You know, you want to be thinking about that bit as well. Got 7 responses, just gonna leave it a couple more seconds. It's gone up to 8. Any more for any more? 8. Gonna go 9. All right, I'm calling it at 9. And we've gone with file path traversal for the most part. Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing that sticks out the most here. This is dynamic content. So you've requested to see a file. The file is a brochure.pdf, and you might be able to put, I don't know, web.config in there or something like that, or try different file paths and see if you could get other files from there that are stored on the server that you're not supposed to be able to see.
So next, moving on to kind of the exploitation phase of testing. So during our test, we've come across a control panel login, which says admin access only, so which massively indicates to us that if we've only got a basic user account, we probably shouldn't be seeing this because this is not somewhere that we'd be logging in. So in terms of what you do next, now that you've found this, would you start heavily brute forcing it, like throwing everything at the application to try common usernames and passwords until you eventually get a successful combination? Would you try check a few key common admin username and passwords, so things like admin or like admin123? Would you leave brute forcing it but record that you have exposed admin interface in the report? Would you check for common vulnerabilities associated with that architecture? So if that's a control panel for WordPress or Umbraco or something off the shelf that you could Google and go, well, I wonder if there's any vulnerabilities that I might be able to leverage and get access to what is behind that login page? Or is it a mixture of B and D, or is it a mixture of A and D? There's 6 already, and I'll just give it another couple seconds. 7, 8. Any more? Anyone last? No? No, there we go. So A, B and D, definitely you try some admin combinations and try admin, administrator, try admin and password 1, something that's dead simple, but you'd ultimately try and approach it in quite a calm and collected manner and throw in heavily brute forcing it. You know, you could do that, but you run the risk of either you could lock someone out or you could knock the app over because you're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at it. And definitely having a look at if it's a common login, if it's for something that is off the shelf, definitely having a bit of a look and seeing if there's any common vulnerabilities that have already been published, that someone's already found an exploit for, to make your job so much easier that you can just quickly exploit and see what is behind that login.
Okay, so just kind of coming up to the last couple of questions here. I'm aware that it's gone past 4, so if anyone does need to leave, don't worry about it. You can leave. And obviously this session has been recorded, so you'll have access to the recording later. So looking quickly at post-exploitation, this is kind of cleaning it up afterwards, that kind of thing. And you've managed to find a SQL injection. It's unauthenticated, and when you've had the SQL injection, you've exploited it, you've managed to crack some hashes in the database as well. So you know all of these passwords, including one for an admin user by the looks of things there. So kind of, you know, interesting stuff that you've found here. What do you do about it? Do you email the client straight away with information about the vuln? Do you write it up and send it encrypted? Do you wait until you've copied out the whole database before you write up the vuln and then send it to the client? So you know, I know everything in that database. Or do you make sure that you send a draft report to the client as soon as it's ready, so on that last reporting day? And the other thing you might do is just as normal, you know, you've got a final version of the report that would probably go out about 10 days after the report's been written. Also, I should mention this is a production site. This isn't a pre-prod site. So this is already out there in the world. All right, so we've got 9 responses there. I'm calling at that. And we've mostly gone write it up and send it encrypted to the client ASAP. Yeah, absolutely. So what you don't want to be doing is sending any information that could be sensitive, so information about vulnerabilities, and that includes the report as well. You don't want to be sending that to out in the open. You want to make sure it's encrypted. You know, if someone could read somebody else's emails, then, you know, that potentially leaves that organization quite vulnerable. I personally, because it's in production, I would make sure that I write that up and send it as soon as I can, because they probably want to take that website down for maintenance ASAP. As soon as they know about it, they're probably going to want to make sure that isn't vulnerable anymore. If it's in pre-prod and it's not actually live yet, or you've connected to it through a VPN for that reason, then you might wait until you've done the draft report to send it. But I certainly wouldn't be waiting until I'd done the whole thing and it was a couple of weeks later and I'd sent the final report. Just because like the client often has quite a fast turnaround. This is probably going to take them quite a long time to remediate. The sooner they know about that kind of thing, the better, really. So yeah, the answer we were kind of looking for there was B, write it up and then send it encrypted as soon as possible. But other testers do slightly different things as well. The most important thing as well would be making sure it's encrypted.
So final one, just moving on to report and recommendations. So you've written an amazing report, you've put all of your issues in that you found, and you're going to send it to the client. How would you approach sending it over? Would you send it as a Word document that's been encrypted? Would you send it as a PDF, a Word document of the draft, and then a PDF of the QA report, an encrypted PDF, or an XE with a backdoor to test the incident response skills? So I'll give you a little bit of time to answer that one. To 8. Any more? No, I'll click. Right, let's have a look then. D, perfect, encrypted PDF, definitely. Sending a Word document, sometimes you're going to have clients who have different requirements. A lot of clients ask us for spreadsheets to accommodate the report, but we mostly try and send it as a PDF, and then that way it stays as the information that you've made it. It can't then start being altered or changed anyway. And yeah, sending it encrypted, absolutely perfect.
So hopefully that's given you all a bit of an idea about what it might be like to do a pen test, and the kinds of things you're going to have to be thinking about as well, and some of the challenges that might come up on a day-to-day basis. So just coming into the final stretch here, what next? So if this is something that's interesting you, what do you want to do? So furthering your technical skills is probably the first port of call. Obviously you've got the course with Abate, but you can also supplement that with doing things like capture the flags. Anyone that doesn't know, a CTF is basically like a hacking game, and the idea is that you can, you have to do a specific type of hack usually to obtain a flag, like the goal that you're looking for. And you can also find a load of vulnerable VMs, a load of vulnerable sites. I've listed some of them there, but there are way more out there than are listed. Most of them are free as well. They really vary in quality, but yeah, most of them are free, so you don't need to necessarily be spending lots of money to be able to be practicing these skills. Hack the Box is a really popular one that does mostly infrastructure stuff, which is a little bit harder to find. Hack the Box has, I believe, it's one of the only ones I think on here that actually has something that you pay for versus stuff that's free. They do have free stuff as well, but if you pay for it, then you can access a load more things. But there's plenty on there with just the free version as well. And yeah, bear in mind that whilst you're doing those things, hacking, and whilst those are, you're furthering your hacking skills and your technical skills, it's not quite the same thing as penetration testing, and it's worth keeping that in mind, especially if you're going for interviews and things like that. And bearing in mind that you'll rarely find a website in the real world that you can shell when you're testing, as you do in many of the test websites that you might come across. So don't get disheartened if you start the job and then you're like, oh no, I can't find anything anywhere, like this is quite locked down. I'm a terrible tester. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean your technical skills are in any way to blame. It's just that it's getting increasingly rare, as you would hope, in the real world. And finally, as testers, we are looking mostly to give coverage rather than to do specific exploits and to go deep. Whilst we do exploits to be able to demonstrate to the customer how much of an impact a specific vulnerability might have, is worth bearing in mind that that's not quite what it's all about. It's about giving as much coverage as we possibly can. So specifically at Claranet, our cybersecurity opportunities, we've got the pen testing stuff with me and Laura. There's our continuous security testing team, which is pretty much all web-based, and people that join us with very little experience will tend to start doing quite a bit of work with the CST team. People who join us on our pen testing team as well do occasional bits of work for CST, but for the most part, they're a separate team. We've got the managed detection and response stuff. So this is what I was saying at the beginning about like Security Operations Center watching client networks to see if there's any suspicious activity going on and responding to that. We've got our compliance side of things as well, and there's the cybersecurity training, which you could get involved with if you were to join us through Sec1. If that's something that you might want to look specifically at the NSS side of things. If you are interested in any opportunities within Claranet, you can go to that site at the bottom, recruitment.poc-sec-1.com. And in fact, I will write that in the chat so that you can click straight on it if you want. That website basically takes you to our recruitment rig. You have the opportunity to do a few different kinds of tests. So you're looking for a few specific vulnerabilities in a few places and writing a little bit about those. You can do that just for fun. You don't have to do it and apply to us. You could just use it as, where are my testing skills at? I'll set up a quick account with an email address that I'll burn later perhaps, and you have a go at it and see what you can find. So please feel free to utilize that resource there. If you are interested, feel free to email one of us. Obviously there's the website as well. And I believe when the course at Abertaders get up and running, the Sec1 and Claranet are looking at doing some placements as well. So that is potentially an opportunity for you to think about in the future. Also feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I'm very bad at responding to messages on LinkedIn, I must say. You're probably going to get better response by emailing me, but I know a couple of people have already connected with me on LinkedIn, so that's fine. I will definitely add you, and feel free to ask questions through there, and to Laura as well. Thank you all very much for sitting with us this afternoon. I hope it's been informative for you. If you've got any questions, we're just going to spend a little bit of time now responding to some. So feel free to drop some in the chat, or if you want to send us an email with your questions, then do that too. So Rachel, I might have to ask you to put that link in the chat, because again, my keyboard isn't recording in the chat.
Okay,
that's the recruitment, I think, Sec-1 one. Thank you. So we've got a question here. Is our office based in London? Clara, Sec 1 specifically, our office is based in Leeds, but the vast majority of our testers are remote. I'm office based. I live in Leeds, but Laura, you're where do you live?
I'm Manchester based. I'm out of home.
Right. Yeah, and there's offices in London, Gloucester, and Warrington as well. So there is a base if you prefer to have a base as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. So yeah, we do have offices scattered around the country as well. If office base is where you want to be, and also remote is definitely an option.
I think if that's it for questions, shall we say bye-bye now? There will be the recording, so I'll send the recording to Andrew, but also I'll send a link on to people so you can watch it straight from the link.
Yeah, that works. And if you do have any more questions, you're welcome to email us.
There's just the last one. Any jobs out there for cybersecurity analysts too?
Cybersecurity analyst is quite a vague job title. So cybersecurity analyst, you might consider kind of the junior pen testing role. They are kind of cybersecurity analysts, perhaps, or information security analysts. If you're thinking specifically on the side of MDR, so managed detection and response, then I believe that there are potentially roles available in the Security Operations Centre. If that's something that you are interested in, let us know and we can put you in touch with the relevant people there as well. I personally don't know that much about it. I'm mostly with the pen testing team, but it is definitely something that there'll be an opportunity for, I think.
Okay, brilliant. All right, well, thank you everyone for your time. And thank you, Freya and Laura, for your time as well. I hope you found it useful and be in touch. Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.